Good.
Possibly I'm sitting on a panel for the Friday, so that
Okay.
will
Good.
fun. Yeah, it should be fun.
And hello, Claire.
Hi Kevin, how you going?
Good.
And
You're in Perth.
I am in Perth, yeah.
All right. Welcome. I'm glad you could join us.
We've got 3 states together. Great.
Hmm.
It's nice to see it all working.
Yes, and can I, in case you aren't aware of this, when you put your cursor, oh, hi Vicky,
Hi,
when you
Kevin.
put your cursor to the right of the screen, you'll get a drop down list of icons, and one of them is for chat, and that might be useful if you're wanting to slip something in and you feel it's difficult to be heard. Can you find that?
Yeah, I'm on an iPad, so I can't. Oh, here we go. Yes, I think so.
Okay. Well, we're still waiting on Linda, but we might get going since it's past 2. I'll just first introduce myself. So I'm Kevin Murray, and I'm in Brunswick in Melbourne at the moment, where, although formally spring has started, there's virtually no sign of it yet, apart from all the blossoms that are out. It's still wintry cold. And with a couple of others here, we've been involved in the development of the World Craft Council Australia, which is a relatively new organisation, but it has a 50-year history in terms of the continuity of links that Australia has had with the international craft scene. And so perhaps Marion, as the president of the World Crafts Council Australia, you'd like to introduce yourself?
Yes. I'm Marion Hodgson. I'm a jeweller, president of the World Craft Council of Australia. I have previously been involved in the crafts for 50 years. So it's very exciting to see this new development, and particularly utilising new media. I mean, Kevin knows I'm not a Facebook person, and I let my website go. But for all the younger people out there, everybody's more literate, and I think it's an opportunity for our region and across Australia.
Marion, you might want to try and get a little closer to the microphone. We have difficulty hearing you. What was the last thing you said?
I can't hear her.
Perhaps we might go to Vicky. Would you like to introduce yourself, Vicky?
Hi, everybody. I'm a contemporary jeweller. I'm in Melbourne, and it's a beautiful sort of afternoon, I suppose. It's spring. I'm the treasurer of the World Crafts Council Australia, and I'm really excited about being involved in this organisation and, yeah, getting to, I don't know, meet other people nationally and keeping support for the crafts alive and sharing opportunities and just, yeah, being involved, doing what I can, how I can. Yeah, I'm here to help and learn about books a bit better probably than I do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's me.
Thanks, Vicky. And is it Elliot? Is that how?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Elliot Rich calling from Alice Springs. It is a glorious day outside. I think it was going to be mid-20s. There's not a cloud in the sky. I'll show you where I'm working from. This is Elbow Workshop in Alice Springs. So yeah, as I was just mentioning before, I share it with my partner James, who's a shoemaker, and we also invite other professional creatives to share the space with us if they're passing through town or they kind of fit with our aim. So I'm a designer. I certainly don't call myself a maker, but I work with makers all the time, and I see it as an extremely projects either happen or don't, depending on the relationship I am able to establish with them.
Great. Well, it's terrific to have someone from Alice Springs. We tried to get somebody from Ernabella to join us, but that's been a bit difficult, but we'll persist with that. It'd be good to get some of the art centres involved in these conversations.
Yeah, the technology, as soon as you leave Alice Springs, isn't quite as advanced as, I don't imagine the internet would be particularly generous in lots of those communities, but I could be wrong.
Mm-hmm. And Claire, you're from Perth?
Perth, yeah. It's a glorious day here in Perth, and I've got a workshop full of students. I'll show you maybe out the window, some of them working and enamelling and stuff today.
Right.
And it's beautiful. Spring has sprung. So, yeah, we're teaching, making, learning in Perth. Really, really in desperate need of some support for contemporary jewellery and craft in general, I think, in Perth, because we don't have the galleries or the shops or anything really showcasing what we do. So for me, it's about getting education out there so that people can start to see, again, what we're producing and why it's better, basically.
Right. You spoke very impressively at the recent JMGA conference in Sydney about what was happening in Western Australia, so you've got a fairly good network there.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of makers here, and the project that I've just recently finished, called A Year in the Making, brought together 12 jewellers, exclusively jewellers, and look, it's been really fantastic and very well received. A huge amount of work, as you all know, when you organise group things, but there's certainly an incredible network. It's just about, I think, coming together and having more maybe group goals and things that we can achieve as a group so that we can be a presence, a more heard presence in the national scene, because I feel like WA really doesn't present as a contemporary jewellery centre, and I think we have the makers and the talent here. It's just that everybody stays really on their own, so it's hard to have a voice.
Yeah, it's a big country. Now, thanks very much, Claire. And now Linda from Queensland, you've joined us.
Hi, Kevin. I'm not sure this is working. I'm getting an overlay of conversation.
We can hear you.
Yeah. Well, I'm finding it hard to speak because I'm hearing one of the previous participants speaking on a delay. I don't know why.
I see. Well, we should check that. You'll see these little green dots. I can see when I'm talking. Sometimes I get a little green dot on your image, Linda, which might be some feedback there. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Anybody hear me?
It's still a bit murky, Marion.
Yeah.
One either.
But we seem to have lost Linda now.
Hey Claire, is Form still operating in Perth or in WA?
Form is still operating in WA. They don't seem to support jewellery like they used to. They're heavily associated with Rio Tinto, and so they do a lot of support for more regional groups. which is great, but they haven't had jewellery shows for a while, and they used to be much more. And the shop at the front of the gallery has closed a few years ago, so there's no real outlet there, and they much more associated with painting these days than objects.
Right.
Right. All right. Can I just do a brief introduction, and because I know that all your time is valuable, and so we want to make the most of it for you. So this is part of a process that began with the defunding of Craft Australia 4 years ago, which means that Australia's been without a national platform for connecting people who are engaged in the craft scene. And since then, NAVA has been responsible for the National Craft Initiative. And what that has involved is a report on the craft sector, and this event that, Elliot, you're going to at the NGV next week, the Parallels, Journeys of Contemporary Making. And but many people have expressed concern that the original idea of the National Craft Initiative, which was to consider the forward path for craft, wasn't on the agenda for Parallels. And there are various reasons for that, and I don't really want to get into it, but we felt that it was important to ensure that there was a forum about this. So we have a symposium on the 19th of September with a number of speakers, and which will be a matter of thinking about ways in which the sector can work together. But because it being based in Melbourne, there was the feeling that we also need to ensure that we've got perspectives from elsewhere in Australia as well. And so what we decided to do was to look at crowdsourcing ideas, and what would be very interesting for us is to, with this particular connection, to get an understanding of where the network is important to you, where you see it being useful to be able to know what's happening, to be promoting what's going on in your part of the world. Are there any questions about that?
Can I ask Claire if you can still study at Curtin in the jewellery area?
Yes, there's just recently this year been a new head of department, and the program has changed dramatically over a period of the last few years. Currently, you can do you can't actually do a jewellery degree per se anymore. You can go and do a 3D design degree, and you can major in product, jewellery or furniture. The gentleman whose name I don't know, who's just become the head of department, is very design based and has taken a big chunk of the workshop time away from the jewellery department. So unfortunately they're not getting a lot of hands-on making, but you can still study there, yes. You can't actually do a jewellery degree per se anymore. You can go and do a 3D design degree, and you can major in product, jewellery or furniture. The gentleman whose name I don't know, who's just become the head of department, is very design.
Sorry, Claire, I've just cancelled that because I don't know what was happening.
A big delay.
Mm-hmm.
Repeat.
Yeah.
That seems to be a commonality that's happening around the art schools.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you're more concerned about venues, and I wonder whether you try to show work over in the States as well?
Absolutely. So, I mean, our current group show, the Year in the Making show of 12 Makers, we opened it in Sydney, and it has been picked up by by a touring body called Art on the Move. So it's going around regional WA. We can't find a Perth venue. It's so ridiculous. Everyone's saying, when's it coming to Perth? Well, it's not at the moment. It's crazy. I've been asked to take it to Brisbane and back to Sydney. I can't get Perth places on board.
It's a shame. Can I just welcome Claire Belfridge.
Hi everyone. I've been hearing for about 10 minutes and it's just taken me a little bit of time to let you know that I'm listening and that I'm here. Anyway, nice to meet you everyone.
How are things in Adelaide?
Pretty good, yeah. I gave a little bit of an update in our last meeting, and I feel like there's a lot of vibrancy here in art and craft. You know, we've just got the end of the SALA, which is South Australian Living Artists Festival, and that seems to be a fantastic thing that was set up, I think, around 10, 12 years ago. We've got Giles Bettison, an artist working with glass, has got a really large solo show at the Jam Factory, and a monograph has just been launched of his work too. Anyway, it feels like there's a lot of vibrancy, and I think there's a lot of there's relatively good state support in South Australia through Arts SA. I think for visual arts and generally, and I think that shows through too.
Good. Can I ask Elliot, because you have this interesting perspective where you are in Central Australia, and you mentioned to me previously that you thought exhibitions were very important, and you curated the exhibition on wood for the Jam Factory?
Yes, right.
Just interested to know from, working in Alice Springs, do you find it very isolated? Is it difficult for you to, know what else is happening and to develop projects where you are?
Not so much to know what's happening. Interesting from there is no design culture in Central Australia. If it is, very in its infancy. Hopefully we'll get somewhere. But from here, I must say that Tasmania and South Australia have definitely the loudest craft and design voices. Victoria as well, but certainly in terms of supporting regional-based practitioners, certainly, those two states seem to be making the right decisions. In particular, Design Tasmania are incredibly savvy in the way that they connect their designers with an international market and opportunities. So I think that certainly from a distance, I really wish that they would adopt the NT as a system, and I could get involved in that. In terms of getting into exhibitions, look, I think in Alice, the scale of the town means that the network in Central Australia is really strong, so doing exhibitions and putting in projects is actually quite feasible here. And Arts NT, our state body, doesn't seem to have a very strong direction, so that if you come to them with a strong project and good support, they will but they certainly do not have a craft or design focus which is one of the suggestions I brought up, was to try to strengthen each of the state arts bodies by networking them more closely, so that we can, I know that the funding is, the funders only want to support their particular state artists and craft people, but that, I wonder if that would be a way of being able to increase the expertise and processes of the arts bodies in all our states, learning from each other a bit more.
Well, this, seems to be the problem without a national framework, but with very strong states. and each of the states has a very active design and craft organisation, like the Jam Factory in Adelaide, and well, Form to a degree with aspects of design, craft, Victoria, and object and artisan and so on. But there isn't a kind of a linking or exchange which seems very strong. But I wonder, Elliot, can you explain why you are in Alice Springs? Because as a designer, you would seem to be far away from the people who would be purchasing your work or commissioning it.
Yes, I've certainly found that, and I'll start off with the negatives, which is that I do feel very isolated from the design community, and I make it a point to take any opportunity that means travelling interstate to really connect with that network, which is not gigantic but very welcome company. But for me, Alice Springs is a really unique and interesting place, and I feel that it is, in many ways, a microcosmos of the kind of Australian psyche and context, and that for me, learning about trying to make a difference through the language or through the practice of design, that Alice Springs is a perfect place to actually test out ideas, and the cross-cultural mesh here is really strong and present, and so lots of the work I do is cross-cultural and either directly or indirectly influenced by that, and I think that, for me as an Australian designer, that's really I be immersed in the world.
When you say cross-cultural, do you mean with Aboriginal communities or other cultures? Right.
Well, increasingly other cultures, but predominantly Indigenous culture, because lots of the organisations that are commissioning the work to do that is they're Indigenous cultures, they're Indigenous organisations.
Mm-hmm. And so,
tourist audience as well.
Sorry, Marion, I heard audience. That was it.
It's a very big tourist destination.
Yes, absolutely. More, I mean, it's certainly, in the last decade, the tourist. Look, the short answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
It is, and also, that it is a unique place, and people here have a real passion and drive for what they do, and everybody's extremely engaged in their particular field, and that's exciting and rewarding. And at the same time, there's things that aren't as rewarding here, but it's certainly a place that you have access to a really broad range of people.
So it seems that sometimes places outside the capital cities can be particularly strong in their sense of community, particularly I'm thinking of towns in Victoria like Castlemaine, which have got a strong community of designer makers, but there, of course, the issue is being connected to the kind of opportunities that can come through capital cities in terms of, say, visitors and markets and so on. I'm wondering, Claire in Perth, how do you feel about working in Perth? Are there advantages in where you are?
Well, I love Perth and WA. It's a beautiful place to be. So in terms of my life in general, very, very happy to be here. But certainly in the last few years since opening up a private jewellery school, I have been asking myself many questions about how to generate more interest and a greater awareness about contemporary design and craft here, because I get greeted with a lot of apathy. There are some great makers, but it feels like people are very tentative to come out of their isolation and do, to even come to shows and visiting artists and different things like that. It's quite hard to get a group of people together, and I'm not too sure why. had a really interesting conversation with Simon Cottrell in Canberra, and he was commenting how Canberra is so amazing and vibrant. And I didn't get to speak to him more about why he thought that was. But I would be interested to know a bit about what's going on in Canberra too, because they're little, like Perth. Everybody tells me that, you know, is it the sheer distance from Melbourne and Sydney that keeps Perth a bit isolated, or is it more to do with that just people's perception? I don't really know.
Mm. Well, I know that certainly the developments like Hotel in Canberra, which appeal to a kind of a hipster crowd, have been very successful, and they're generating activity and an aesthetic about the handmade that seems to be quite popularist. People love visiting. They've got good restaurants and cafes, and that kind of model seems to be expanding in Canberra. And why Canberra, I don't know. Perhaps it's to do
Yeah, well,
with...
I can't help but think with a really active gallery like Bilk and what they promote with their touring shows and their collection, that has got to help. And I think that's what's really missing in Perth as a starting point. So I think for me, it has become a little bit about not having a space to show, not having outlets to sell from that are really sort of high-end, good design, craft-based outlets, or even spaces.
I would think that would make a huge difference. I just recently had 5 years living in Canberra, and in that time, you know, Bilk opened their gallery in Monica, and it's fantastic. I didn't get to every opening, but I did go to quite a lot, and those focal points really, really important. Apart from the selling of work, etc., but just for the people in that field to come together, it's really critical, isn't it?
I think
It's incredibly difficult, Claire, to not have an outlet.
it certainly feels like it's something that's really missing, and I mean, but I don't have the financial backing to, like, we've opened up a little small space in my workshop here where I've got work on display, but the only people, we don't have a walk by traffic or anything, so the only people who see it are my students, which is great, and we're getting it out there in a small sense, but it's really, I think it's just about showing the greater public what we do in a really central location, so that people who don't normally walk into those spaces get access to more contemporary design, and I think that's really what's missing. But I could be wrong. I don't know. I'm trying to work out.
Could be right, yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of the, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the document, which has got the kind of proposals, which are, I mean, these are proposals which have been put together not as applications to the Australia Council, which is, I guess, how things have been viewed in the past, partly because of the cuts that have occurred to the Australia Council means that there's a lot less room for them to move. Plus, one of the changes at the Australia Council is with the abandonment of the boards, it's harder to find the interests of a particular sector like craft and design being considered or looked after. But still, in terms of a nation, Australia, there is the potential for all of us involved to work together on different kinds of initiatives. So I'm interested to think in the case of Claire and Perth, even though perhaps the state-based initiatives may not be providing what you feel is necessary now, whether there are any national kinds of proposals, such as the ones that we've put on the table, that could be useful to you.
Yeah, well, I think that the magazine, the Garland idea, is a really good idea, and I do remember when jewellery in particular had the publication, The Lemel, magazine that went out, and everybody had a little state profile. Somebody wrote a little bit about what was going on where, and I really missed that. And I think that having some sort of cohesive publication that had a bit about each state and who was doing what would be fabulous to keep people in the loop. So I think that magazine sounds really exciting.
Oh, that's good to hear. We've got Robert Cook as on the editorial board, but obviously we take advice as to who you think can ensure that we keep in touch with what's happening in Western Australia. Plus, of course, setting up various social media like Facebook and so on also is a way of understanding that.
Oh, and don't get me wrong, I think there's a lot of ways to stay informed, and you're as informed as you want to be in terms of social media. It's all out there. I'm just a bit useless on the computer, so I tend to sit at my jewellery bench and want the world to be presented, so,
So one of the ideas with Garland, the way in which it's going to operate, is that each quarter we will focus on a different creative place within the Asia Pacific. So the first one is in Chongju, where the magazine's going to be launched next month. And so the idea is to have a mix of centres, other parts of Asia Pacific where particularly Australians are engaged, like Yogyakarta, Mumbai, Tokyo, with a mix of Australian centres, and places like Adelaide, Alice Springs, Perth would be good. And partly use Garland as a way of generating interest, and with an issue coming up each quarter with the focus on a particular place, then we can work in partnership with various organisations and makers and designers to try and do the best in terms of representing what's happening. So, thoughts as to who we'd work with in different parts of Australia to get that would be much appreciated.
It seems to me that Western Australia is almost closer to Indonesia than to Sydney. Is there something that you can work between Western Australia and your northern neighbours?
Oh, I can't hear you, Marion. I'm sorry.
Marion's asking in terms of the proximity between Perth and Indonesia or Singapore, whether...
Oh, now I've lost Kevin.
We've all lost Kevin.
Right.
Feels anarchic now.
Hi Claire, Vicky Mason.
How are you, Vicky?
I've got 9 for your class, Vicky.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, can't wait.
Kevin
back? Yes.
Sorry, I missed something. I don't know what happened.
We all just sang a song together for a few minutes.
Oh,
Sorry, Kevin, you were telling me what Marion said because I couldn't hear her. I'm sorry.
Oh, she was just saying that. Do you feel?
Oh, there he goes again.
Second time. I'm not meant to hear that comment.
Can I ask who's going to be at the conferences in Melbourne next week? I'm going to come over for it.
I'm going on the Friday.
Yep.
Yep, probably on the Friday, the Makers' Day.
Yep.
And the Saturday.
And okay, great.
Saturday we won't drop out all the time.
No, it'll be that technology that works well for me called face to face.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in terms of what's happening in Alice Springs, looking at that list, Elliot, do you see particular proposals. You've mentioned already the exchange of between the different arts councils like Design Tasmania and Arts NT, the development of an exhibition touring overseas. Are there any of the others that you feel would be useful?
I'm sorry to say I read it too long ago and haven't refreshed,
Right.
but I will find it again now. Actually, can you put the link to it just in the chat? Is that
Sure.
Thanks.
Uh,
Yeah, because I wonder whether, I don't know if it's the same with elsewhere, but we, just that thing about being more valued when you're exported. And I wonder whether the National Craft Initiative working through the different state bodies could, like a national survey show, just in terms of, thanks for that, just in terms of really placing everybody in, giving that national perspective. Because I don't know if you're like, with me, whenever I pick up that Qantas magazine, the first thing I want to know is what's happening in the NT, and there's usually only one thing, and, all the other, Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria always have about 8 things, and it always feels like, obviously there's a lot more happening there, but anyway, it feels good even just to be there in that mix. So, yeah, I guess you don't often, because of the way the funding works, you would be much better aware of this than me, but you very rarely see those national scale exhibitions.
one of the areas that is important to discuss concerns the World Craft Council network, and this, as I said, is something 50 years old, and it's very strong in the Asia Pacific. The presidency's in China at the moment, and so there's a lot of national pride associated with the way in which different countries support the World Crafts Council. And they host large events, some of which, Vicky, you are the one in Dongyang for the Golden Jubilee, and Marion, you're at Abu Shan, the Jewelry Summit in Delhi. So some of us had experience of these, which are wonderful, incredible events to connect people from all different countries of the world, particularly those countries we don't see a lot of, such as in the Middle East and Central Asia, which are countries that are becoming increasingly active in this network. But one of the issues that we have to deal with is that most of those countries understand craft as something which is based in tradition. So it's part of their cultural heritage, which is one of the reasons why there's a lot of national pride attached to it. So countries like Australia and like the United States, I mean, there are the European countries and so on, which have their own separate regions, but we're thrown together with the Asian countries. So in a sense where we have to always be talking about the difference between traditional craft, contemporary craft, studio craft, as well as design and so on. But it means that there are a number of programs that are part of this network, and we're interested to know how useful they are. One of them, for instance, coming up is the Award of Excellence. And this is a program which has been going through UNESCO for a number of years, and essentially what happens is that craftspeople submit a sample of a product, a craft product, and this is then assessed by a jury, and if it's seen as an interesting and worthwhile product, it would be then given this Award of Excellence, which craftspeople around the world have used very successfully to market what they're doing and to demonstrate that they have this recognition. Plus, these products are then marketed internationally through UNESCO. China now has established a World Craft Museum in Nantong, and they collect these products for display. So this is going to be the first time that we've been invited as a country, Australia, to participate in this program, and so we're interested to know to what extent you think this could be useful, or how we, some of the issues that we would need to think about in how we implement it.
So what is you've been asked to be involved in what capacity?
To promote it so that we can collect works from around Australia of people, and then we send them to Kuwait, where the judging will happen.
Okay. So existing works, or will you commission works?
Oh no,
or...
there'll be existing works. We won't be commissioning.
That sounds really exciting. That's that's great.
Part of our challenge, of course, is to ensure that we've got the network to let people know about this. And one of the reasons for setting up World Craft Council Australia and doing events like this is partly a sense of frustration that we have so many opportunities that come through the World Craft Council, and we want to make sure that more people have access to it.
I think it sounds really good too, Kevin. It's one of the ones that I made a little note about. I think it's such a good way of being connected at a level, I guess, that is about aspects of recognition of status, or things that are sort of representative, and that I think is really important, and equally important is the grassroots kind of projects and proposals too. So I'll just mention this, but I loved the Craft Without Borders idea too. But anyway, as more of a grassroots kind of connecting thing. But the UNESCO award I think is great, and I love it to be. I don't know a ton about UNESCO, but with our Oslo conference this year, we connected our theme to the UNESCO's International Year of Light, and it was just lovely having a bit of contact with UNESCO through that and feeling that we were part of something bigger, and we looked at the connections between craft and science, and anyway, so just all of those little connections I think are really terrific, both actually and also what they sort of represent, I guess. It's a really good idea. Yeah. Haven't got any thoughts on the how. I mean, I can.
Right.
I'm not quite sure how what the resourcing is, if anything at the moment at the Australian, the World Crafts Council Australia, and even as you say, collecting works from around the country, I go, oh, okay, that's quite a job, and you can see quite quickly it could be a biggish job, and that would need quite a bit of resourcing. And there's always the old equity issue, and people want to know why someone got what. But
well, I'd have to say that in most cases, most people who submit works end up getting this award just for the very effort that they've gone to and filling out the forms and so on. But but one of the issues that comes up with this is that another major initiative of the World Craft Council Asia Pacific is the Encyclopedia of Craft in the Asia Pacific, and this is a project where countries can determine themselves what they deem to be their living crafts of note. And so what's come up are activities and processes that we might be surprised to think of craft, like in Oman, for instance. They list incense making as a national craft. But I think one of the issues in Australia, of course, is that we've got this very strong studio craft scene and design scene. And alongside that are various niche kinds of crafts, such as surfboard making, boat building, hat making, which may be idiomatically Australian, but are seen as something very different, or at least in the past. And Elliot, you're in close association with a shoemaker, is that right?
Yes. Yep.
Yes.
Other in very close association.
Right. Which has traditions and so on associated with it, and so part of what's emerged with this is for us to think about what the relationship between these heritage crafts and the artistic and design forms are there is it worthwhile thinking about how we might connect them together?
Yeah, because it's not really the individual craft practices themselves, but the approach that is kind of unique to Australia. It's more a process and the way you practice rather than saying it's making hats. So maybe if we're able to come up with our own category, that we shifted away from a material and a process and more into a practice realm. And maybe that would be a way of being, giving a kind of clear indication of what the Australian craft and design scene is actually about.
That's really interesting. What would you say is there a particular kind of approach which you identify as Australian?
Yeah, definitely in terms of, I think it's a lot to do about scale. So certainly, within design, and it's shifting more towards what Australian practitioners have. Certainly Australian design, like the typical American or European designer would work company, and it would be large scale and work in mass, whereas I feel like in Australia we've always worked at a smaller scale, and it's always been in relation to the processes and materials that are available. Certainly in Alice Springs, there are very few manufacturing sectors, and as a designer, it's you have to be resourceful in terms of what you use, and I feel like that certainly historically that's typical of Australian or colonial Australia. But actually also, make a big caution Australia, but certainly that relationship between materials and processes, and a scale, so people working one-to-one, I guess.
Hands-on.
As a beginning thought, I'm not sure. I can kind of see how you might still apply that to, say, incense making. That would again be about, but I guess by those other countries, being able to say there is a whole community of people that work on incense, that it's no longer about that individual scale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting talking to basket makers, where there was a recent national gathering of basket makers, that they were claiming, although basketry, for instance, is practiced in many other countries, that what distinguishes Australian work is using materials that are at hand. So it's using local grasses, things like the ghost nets, use of what gets washed up on the coastlines. I thought that was an interesting perspective.
Well, and I guess if globally we were, as a country, yes, there was trade happening, but there's our borders are not nearly as porous as Europe, Asia, Africa. So, yeah, I guess that really is typical, or there is a reasoning behind why we might have developed a more, like a more, what am I trying to say, location vernacular or something. That is about resources. I mean, not resource maybe.
I wonder if the other key, another idea that might define us is the way people, generally in Australia move into, craft and design practice is generally, I think, through tertiary education. I don't know Kevin, I don't know, I'm really taking a guess, but when the little bit of a picture that you painted of the incense makers, I have a guess that it's not that path that say I took, to get into my craft. Would that be right?
No, actually, no. There's not in a university sense, but Oman has a craft academy. The Sultan, their caboose, has established it, and they have courses in those crafts which they deem of national. But obviously, they're not in the university context. They'd be very practical courses.
Yeah, so that might be one of the ways. I'm not sure. I think that has something quite a strong impact on our scene. Is that, you know, most people enter it for a tertiary education. What do you guys reckon? No? Or, yeah?
Yeah,
I
I agree, Claire. Yep.
So it's
Well,
quite
yeah,
different from learning from your mum or,
yeah.
yeah.
And that in other areas, you imagine, and I'm drawing from stereotypes here, that area, you know, if you think about, you know, people living in Indonesia, that there is a particular craft that already exists there that people build on and become, rather than a sense of real agency that craft makers and designers have in Australia. It's a, you know, it's about an individual, agency rather
I
than.
think the individual is probably a key in that. But maybe, but not for the heritage crafts, maybe, given. I mean, I always laughed because my mum was such a good knitter and sewer, and I was dismal at it, you know. And it was sort of hilarious that I ended up being a crafts person because I so failed the, you know, learning the skills at home. Anyway, it's fun.
I think it gives a generation that. It has to. So detailed.
But Claire, you know, something like glass, for instance, is a medium that, unlike, say, textiles or ceramics, where other cultures of the Asia Pacific, you know, you'd say in terms of the proportion, you know, have a much stronger sector. Australia seems to have one of the leading glass production areas in the Asia Pacific, but at the same time, it's not something we associate with tradition. It seems quite a modern
No,
kind of medium.
absolutely. Yeah.
But do you see that, despite that, there is something unique about Australian glass in that context?
We get definitely that question comes up quite a bit. I think I don't know if I'd quite say unique, but some of the things I think when you have something that doesn't have the wealth and the weight of tradition attached to it, then there's all sorts of freedom that you have. And I would say, you know, just at the most basic level, I mean, I did my training in the 80s, and, you know, at that time there weren't, I don't think there were any women glassblowers in Italy, you know. So just on that really basic level, we haven't got that weight or that wealth of tradition, but it gives us a lot of freedom to do what we want. But there are other countries like that too, I think, in glass.
Right. It's something interesting to consider. One of the other possibilities that we had on the table was something related to a platform called Meetup, where people who could subscribe or join a network, and there would be a local facilitator who would find a time and a place, and people could meet, maybe to do little presentations about work or whatever. And it's a relatively, once it's going, it's a relatively self-maintaining kind of platform. I first came across it learning a language, where people would, rather than do formal lessons, or in addition to that, they could just spend some time talking that language with others, and it seemed to work really well. I'm just wondering whether you could see that as being something useful in terms of craft and design across the country, in the absence of there being, you know, a national or state-based bodies that organise these sorts of events.
Is it a face-to-face, sorry, or is it a online, Kevin's? Sorry, I might have missed a bit.
No, it's face-to-face. You nominate a time and a place.
Yeah.
Claire, you're on mute in case you're trying to speak to us, Claire in Perth.
Yeah, I think somebody muted her back up here somewhere.
Oh, I see. There you go. Did we miss something that you were saying?
No, I just thought that the meetup thing would be quite a good idea, because I feel like that's what I have tried to do a little bit in Perth with jewellers, to create events and opportunities to get together and talk. But don't have a huge participation rate. Nobody really jumps on board with anything, it feels like. So having a broader audience perhaps, or a wider pool of people to draw from for such things, I think would be really great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It's a bit like, go on, Elliot.
we had an event here, I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago, but people still talk about it, and it was a kind of Pecha Kucha scenario where there was 10 speakers, they had 10 minutes and 10 images. And I think what people, and people still say, oh, do you remember that, that talk we had, blah, 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 that was great. And I think what was really good about it was that there was people from so many different practices. So there was an anthropologist and a biologist and a historian, and I guess that if you can, like maybe even using the Pecha Kucha platform because it already exists and you'll be able to just kind of piggyback onto it. But I think places like trying to, I don't know, for me, that was particularly successful because of its broad scale, and it meant that a whole lot of, you could draw in a whole lot of different audiences. And I guess, in a small town, you have to do that because there's not. I'm the only designer. I think there's 2 of us. But certainly, it sounds like that would be good in terms of, just reaching out to other audiences. But just like being considered about whether you keep it to just craft or a small section, or whether you really broaden out and engage with new audiences. And it was really like the similarities across the 10 speakers was really exciting because it was about place, or everybody coming to it through a different more practice.
That's really important to hear, Elliot. Thanks for that. I just wonder, finally, Vicky, you might want to just say something briefly about the ethical makers movement, which was sort of a network that was developed in Melbourne and is potentially looking at creating allied networks in other cities, people inspired by a particular set of values.
There's a movement that there's a small groundswell in Melbourne amongst some makers kind of coming out of the contemporary jewellery field to start to talk about issues of sustainability and kind of working in craft practice to kind of raise awareness, I suppose, about our materials, about issues of waste, and it's a very new organisation, but I think there's genuine interest nationally, and again, it's just a matter of, maybe this is, Elliot, one of these. We could get together and talk about these issues across the state. I mean, maybe this is a forum for that. But it's certainly topical here in Melbourne, and there are people interested in the ethics of making and sustainability and how we go forward in a very kind of, consumer-driven, wasteful, profligate perhaps even. Age. It's a great organisation. Claire, I don't know if you have these conversations or talk to people in Perth about, mining and, I don't know, we want to maybe be active. I mean, it's a huge area, obviously. But yeah, we're a new group and building momentum slowly.
Yeah, well, I think that is one of the broader issues, Elliot, that could be potentially looked at in terms of putting people together. But out of respect of your time, we should, I think, call it an end now, unless there's anything particular you want to say that you feel hasn't been addressed. Okay, the phone has started.
Me?
Well,
sorry, I did have one suggestion,
yes.
which would be the easy one, which is a kind of guide to acknowledgement in when you're making something. It's so that anything that's designed or made in Australia has an acknowledgement of who made it, who designed it, where it was made, but coming up with a kind of kind of standard that just to make sure that wherever. Yeah, that makers are always recognised in there, because a lot of the time, certainly within the design field, the designer is hailed as, you know, being the person who has done everything, and it's completely inaccurate. And there are a few companies who certainly acknowledge their, you know, their makers, but yeah, I think that it would be a simple, I say simple. There's a lot that would go into it, but it would be a simple mechanism to kind of just acknowledge all the parties that go into actually making in Australia, and kind of thing. Sorry.
Right, that sounds a brilliant idea, and maybe something worth discussing, particularly when looking at my understanding of parallels is it's looking at the relationship between, or partnership between design and craft, and designers and craftspeople. So that could be an important issue, particularly in terms of building trust, because I know that a few craftspeople in the past have had their fingers burnt by being commissioned to make work for a designer and finding that their contribution hasn't been acknowledged. That's a great idea. All right, well, thank you so much. Please stay in touch, and we'll look forward to seeing Claire Belfridge, you're coming to Melbourne, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm coming for Parallels and the
symposium.
The symposium, so I'm really, really pleased.
Elliot, if you're interested, I think we've still got a ticket or two, not many, left on the Saturday afternoon. Yeah, consider that.
Thank you. I think that's where, I think I'm going to Tassie for the design camp.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
For any reason that falls through.
Thanks so much for your patience.
Thank you. That was
glad it worked out this time round.
This has worked much better. It's great. Thanks, Kevin.
Yes, and so hopefully we'll continue with this as we hear different voices, and you'd be welcome to join them. Okay.
Right.
Okay. See you.
See you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.